So thank you for joining us again. We collected some questions from the various breakout sessions, and I've tried to go through, look for some commonalities, some things that we might begin the conversation with, and if we get through these, there's also a microphone so that people can come and ask questions from the audience. So I wanted to start with a question about active learning, and what are the physical limitations of the space? How does that affect your ability to implement active learning? I think that there are some people that are wondering about fixed lecture halls and how much you can really do. And I'm just curious if you've grappled with that and what advice that you have. And we're going to use one mic just because of this morning. And I'm glad to pass.
So the classroom makes a big difference. So I've done this in two locations, one with fixed tables and actually fixed chairs, and then another in a 400-seat auditorium. And it's not ideal in either of those. Obviously, you'd like chairs with wheels on them. You'd like tables that can move together. You could adjust group sizes for the type of problem that you're dealing with. If you're doing a case study and maybe there's 8 different stakeholders, you might need 1 table size. If it's a small problem where they're blasting through some calculation or something, maybe you just need 3. The spaces are a challenge. My answer to this is don't let it be an excuse to not do active learning, because it's certainly better than the alternative.
Yeah, we have a very old school of nursing, and they just broke ground, and we'll get a brand new school of nursing. So we've thought about this for the new building, but right now we have some real challenges. So the space that we have is about a 1925 room that is, all fixed seats, and the group sizes are, it's a challenge getting people to turn around and face each other. What we have found over time is there's a couple of tables at the back of the room, and people do quickly gravitate towards those. So it does matter. People want to see each other when they know they're going to talk with each other. And at first, when we tried to do it, I did a lot of running around and saying, you can't see each other and you're facing away from each other. You come around here, and sort of poking them into, and then turn around. I was sort of, hurting them a little bit because it was already uncomfortable for them to even get in a group, and then the space was dreadful. So yeah, it makes quite a difference, but we did it anyway because we really were committed to it.
In terms of the numbers, I would, in the breakout session, my class is like 65, 70. I think it'd be harder for me to do the kind of flip class that I'm doing where we're in small groups and we're talking with a larger number, because I print out the roster with pictures, and I pretty much memorize people's names so that I can call on people by name. I think over 70, that would get to be pretty difficult. So I'm not sure if I could give advice for bigger classes and how to flip them. But for 70 or below, I would echo these guys in saying that the space is tricky. I've done one class once in a stadium seating, fixed stadium seating, the School of Dentistry building, and I thought that was awful. But the next time I did the class, I did it in fixed tables where you could have up to 6 students. And I'd say the difference was in the fixed stadium seating, they did have to rearrange themselves, but it kind of made it easier for me to circulate because I could come in and sit down with them. In the fixed table, you want to circulate. When you walk up to the table, you're standing and they're seated. And so it's a really weird, the power dynamics, the sort of, I'm the professor here, that it's a little more awkward with the fixed seating in that sense. But I think you just have to work with what you get. And they worked both ways, but you just have to adapt.
Another question came up in a team-taught course. If there's a member of the team who is not comfortable with the active learning part of the course, how do you deal with that? And I don't know if any of you have experience in the team-taught sort of.
Yeah, I've had just this past semester where we did half the term was flipped and half the term wasn't. And, again, the question boils down to being clear to the students up front if you're going to be in mixed mode on the first day of class. We talked about it before the class began, and we were very clear on the syllabus, what was going to happen exactly when. So at least the students weren't confused. Now you look at the end of term evaluations and you see this bifurcation. The students who did not care for the accountability, they were relatively low in number, but they were very vocal. And they brought the averages down in terms of student evaluations. So that is what it is. Of course, on the positive side, there were many more. So you don't have to keep it homogenous in a team talk class, but you definitely have to manage the issue. That's what we learned.
Our course sequence includes a lot of faculty from a lot of different areas, and I think all of our faculty have a heavy clinical or research commitment. And so when we made the decision as course coordinators and as a faculty overall to go toward this unifying pedagogy, team-based learning for 5 semesters, we were really saying we're all in. We did not leave open the possibility that someone could lecture for their unit while others were doing team-based learning. We said we would all go. And so the way the courses played out is that, they played out in 5 consecutive semesters starting in winter 2011. So starting in spring 2011, we had our early adopters teach in winter 2011. And then starting in spring and summer 2011, we had a lot of faculty workshops in order to bring our faculty up to speed with what it would take to adapt their content from lecture over to team-based learning. And those included seminars on backwards course design. We also had someone from medical education come to talk to us about what makes good team-based learning exercises for class time. And we had venues where faculty could peer review each other's materials and offer advice on how to write better problems or better quizzes or design better self-study. So we took a very formative, proactive approach to try to get all of our faculty on board and moving toward this ultimate goal. In the end, I think because so many of us have heavy commitments, we probably met with variable success the first year out. But that first year is a really good learning experience. And I think as the years go by, the second year, I think, is a very equalizing year where the late adopters are looking a whole lot more like the early adopters with regards to the quality of teaching.
So what I hear you saying is scaffolding in some skill building, some support, whether peer support or other types for faculty who are making this transition. And I just want to mention, I think people know that CRLT is available for that, whether it's one-on-one consultations. If it's more on a departmental level, we can certainly bring workshops, programs in for faculty, and we'd be glad to work with you on that. So if we can help with that scaffolding process, we would definitely be interested in that. Yeah.
So one more thing I just thought of when you were saying that is my sense is a flipped classroom is actually easier to transfer to somebody else than a traditional lecture base. So imagine somebody hands you, here's your PowerPoint, versus here is a set of experiences. Now your job during class is to go in and to walk the students through this type of problem, and you can actually be creative in terms of adjusting this problem or what have you. So it does have that advantage as well.
There are a whole range of questions on the other side, and that is the student's experience. Some of these related to students who don't necessarily flourish with active learning, who might be more comfortable with lecture, students who are low performers, and do they get lost in this sort of process, and also students with disabilities who might have difficulties with some of these issues. So from the student perspective, for students who are not quite fitting the mold, do people have advice about that and how that played out in your classrooms?
I want to speak about disabilities to start. We because it's a nursing classroom, the disability more frequently you might see is hearing loss. And we had one student that had, quite reduced hearing. She had someone in the classroom that was taking notes, but I just told you what a dreadful classroom we had. So when the din started with the team-based learning, with the students in their groups, this student was just lost. And she came to me right away and said, this isn't going to work for me. I can read lips, but you know, I am completely, she has hearing aids. So what we did was have her, there were some tables at the back of the classroom. We had her sit at the back of the classroom, and then as soon as it came time to get into the groups, had her jump into a group so she could face someone and do the lip reading. The other thing I did is make sure that, because there are two of us in the classroom, I made sure I got to the note taker, made sure she had all the handouts, made sure she understood what we were doing in terms of the learning environment. Was it a case study, whatever it was we were doing, and did she have any questions? Because she wasn't necessarily a medical professional, she was a note taker. So were there questions she had, so that her notes were pretty tight, and then circled back at the end of the course, at the end of the class that day. Is there anything else you need to get these notes right? Because they're pretty good about capturing notes. So the hearing loss issue was one that we had to deal with a bit. That student ended up doing pretty well. She didn't particularly like it. She told us that. And I can imagine why it would be harder to learn that way if you had significant hearing loss. It's interesting, sometimes the students who say they don't like it aren't comfortable with it, but they do just fine. The students that don't engage in it and don't necessarily like it, there's probably a subset that, you know, that are struggling anyway. I'm not sure if that's a different subset because of the learning style, or it's the same students that would not be engaging in the material in other ways. And we haven't had a fine tooth enough evaluation to be able to sort that out.
So in terms of student experience, from my perspective, I'm teaching, these two classes are surveys. So a survey of American Indian history, a survey of the West. And so you'll get the majority of students who are not history majors, and you'll get people from School of Engineering or things like that. So you have some level, you have people who have an anxiety about, I'm not a humanities person, I'm worried about how to perform in this class. And then you also have the sort of level of students who, because you have to speak in my class, both in small groups, but also at some point, you have to speak to in front of your peers, all 65, 70 of them. People have anxiety about that. And so in part, I started off by making it clear that this is not math. So if you're watching the movie Shane, there's not a right or wrong opinion about what that movie means. So you can feel a little bit of freedom that you can make an argument, you can express yourself. It's not a concrete thing. So that sort of sense that they don't have the right answer, you want to try to reassure them that that's not an issue. We're going to talk through things. And then also really try to actively manage them in small groups when you can tell who's not participating. And so you just have to sort of insert yourself on those kind of situations. And when you have people who haven't then spoken with a large group, the same thing. You have to kind of actively stay on top of that and talk with the student. You know, I notice you haven't spoken. We want to talk about this and help them kind of strategize how they might work themselves up to it. So it requires probably more active management of your students, their expectations and anxieties than you would normally have in a lecture class.
I don't have too much to add, except one thing, and I think you both alluded to it, so you're going to find out faster if somebody's struggling in a flipped environment than a traditional environment. And so that, in my hypothesis has been, and it would be very difficult to prove, that it's the same group of people who are struggling because they tend to be complaining about wanting to be held accountable, and there's just a general lack of interest in the subject to begin with. So at least you can step in and start that conversation at an earlier point.
And some of this is a different type of classroom management with the groups. You're managing that kind of participation. There's a question here about active learning and what happens when an activity fizzles, or for instance, when activities take a lot less time and you've got time left over, or an activity runs over. So what happens when the active learning doesn't go according to plan?
Well, that's never happened to me, but The experts in team-based learning tell us that some of the characteristics of a really good team problem is one that has more than one right answer, and then the choices that you give them include many of those right answers. And so now the students are forced to discriminate between many possible, feasible, plausible answers, and that will oftentimes give much richer discussion than a problem that literally has maybe like one right answer, one best answer, and then the others are sort of a distant second. So there are strategies like that that you can employ to sort of protect yourself from the problem that fizzles. The problem that fizzles is the one that's too easy or the answer is too obvious. So instead of saying, what's the best answer, you might say, well, the best answer won't work in this situation because of resource limitations, so what's your second best answer? Something like that might be more fun in a team-based environment than what's the best answer. We do have trouble with discussions going too long far more often than we have trouble with them going too short. And so what we're doing now, I think, as faculty is we're writing fewer problems, and we're having to be much more strategic with what those problems entail. We really have to distill down to the bare essence for ourselves what is essential for students to come away with, and then build our problems around just those essential factors. Try to build in 2 or 3 different learning objectives into each problem so that you can multitask and get pretty far in a short period of time. So that's what I would say we're working with.
I know you have to go. Yeah, thank you. I know Tammy has to go, so can we thank her, please, for her participation today? So I'll ask others about this idea, and I think it's a general question about how you come up with active learning activities. You know,
I would have the opposite experience in terms of Tammy was just saying, like, distilling just a couple questions. So for a humanities class, for your text-based analysis, I found that sometimes if I only have 4 questions, I can't keep it going for an hour and 20 minutes. So I would rather err on the side of having too many questions. And if the classroom discussion really picks up on your second or third question and you end up spending most of the time you don't finish it, I think that's fine. Usually I have a set of clear objectives or ideas in my head that I think is important that get discussed and thought about. And as long as that happens, I'm fine. But I would rather have too many questions to give me flexibility. If the students didn't get where I wanted them to get with a particular issue or idea, then I've got other questions I can try to build from. Too few questions, they can answer them pretty quickly because they're not going to give you really elaborate answers. It's amazing how you can get like a 1-sentence answer pretty consistently.
So your question then was more about the second question. One of the things that we've struggled with a little bit, so we put too much into ours a lot of times, and then students get sort of irritated because they have a piece of paper that says they have all these case studies, and we don't get to the 4th case study, and they're always suspicious we're gonna put it on the test. So that's a little bit of a problem. So I think we're in the learning curve. You know, we haven't done it as long as some of you have. The other thing we're trying to do is if one flops, and we've had a couple of them that have flopped, we try to go back and figure out what it is that has flopped. So a good example is we had an expert on genetics come, and she had some I thought they looked really good to me, case studies, but the students just didn't get it. So I went back to her and we reworked what the main elements we wanted out of each case study, and we had them work on the various case studies, and then that was much more successful. So part of it was whether I had clarity and the guest lecturer had clarity on what we really expected to come out of each of those case studies. So I guess I would say that it's the intentionality of it, and you have to, you know, be willing to fail on 1 or 2 of these things and just suck it up and figure it out again.
not a whole lot to add again, just that the opportunity, so I teach in engineering, and the opportunity to go and not just show students how to solve a problem, but to get into being able to work with them on what question to ask. And I like to think of it as climbing a ladder. So our students get really good at going from one rung to the next rung to the next rung. So we just introduced a concept. This concept is well embodied in an equation. So we give them some of the variables, they figure out the other ones. In this environment, you can completely get away from that and work with them, and even mix it up a bit. Bring a problem that was actually related to a concept we did 2 weeks ago. And say, okay, well, what, it kind of looks like what we were just talking about, but it isn't. So getting them to ask the right questions. And of course, you work through the mechanics of climbing the ladder, but then you also can talk about what to do when you get to the top of the roof, right? So thinking about, now being able to connect engineering to its application. I mean, engineering is about people as much as anything else, but we don't tend to talk about the social implications of some of the work that we do. So the flipped classroom provides all, that platform to bring up those issues, and it engages them into these problems a little bit more as well.
Yeah, so that's another question that came up, is whether active learning is only about application or whether there can be time made for reflection and critical thinking as well. And it sounds like where you're going on that. I wanted to shift gears to plagiarism and just wonder how the flipped classroom has affected plagiarism, or whether it has at all. Academic integrity, has this come up in the flipped classroom? If so, how, and how have you dealt with it?
The recent kind of case of plagiarism I had was actually a person they didn't know what plagiarism was. They were doing, so for my class of history, you're analyzing sources and making an argument, and I got somebody who essentially had, of course, gone to a website and pasted something out. The grader brought it to my attention. I had a talk with the student, and the student just was a sophomore and undeclared and didn't know that you couldn't not cite sources or that you couldn't copy something. And so that was the only case of plagiarism I've really had to deal with. Otherwise, it's pretty idiosyncratic. They're working on, they're formulating their own research questions, or they're using documents that I've assigned to them to look at, so they've got to answer it. It makes it harder to cheat on.
We were teaching seniors, so plagiarism was less of an issue, but we did a project that included them doing a voiceover PowerPoint with a lot, and they told a story. We used VoiceThread, and many of these students have not been exposed to people during end of life, and this was an end of life project. And the first time we did the project, we said, and you have to cite your sources for the pictures and stuff, but that's about all we said. Well, we got pictures of people's grandmas with no citation, and we got, all kinds of photos and stuff, and we didn't realize how specific we had to be. So the next time we did it, we said, now look, if you're going to put a picture of your grandmother on there who died, you need to talk to the family, and you have to say, I got permission from. They really struggled with photos and graphic things. They kind of get it about pasting from the internet, but they don't get it about visual images. So that was a little bit of a surprise to us, and the specificity that we had to give them. They also understand very much about private health information, so that wasn't an issue. They knew better than to use patient names and things like that. But the images were kind of a sticking point for them.
In about 10 years of teaching, I'd seen 2 plagiarism cases. And then I was doing the flipped classroom for about 2 years now. I saw 2 plagiarism cases. So I said, well, is that a trend? What is that? And, who knows? But I think in my mind, it became easier to detect it because, it's part of the spirit of the flipped classroom. You're asking students for their opinions and their engagement. Now, if you do that on a homework question, And it's not just the problem anymore, it's some interpretation of the context of the problem. And it looks like what somebody else turned in, you just spot that a mile away. Whereas if it's just equations and the like, it's harder to detect. So that's and I view that as a positive, actually being able to detect that. And you can start that conversation. It's a much more regular conversation I have with classes now after those experiences.
So I wanted to turn it over to the audience, and we have a microphone here. Do you have questions that haven't been asked that you'd like to pose to the panelists?
Stuff the jump.
That's right. Yeah. Would you mind coming up to the, or if someone could bring a microphone.
So the biggest question, many in my group had this earlier, was once we get to this point and we want to do the implementation, is there a resource that we can go to that has a list of various software, various syllabi that have been used for flipped classes, some sort of central database for those of us that don't have someone to go to that's already doing this,
Right.
and would like to see examples and to hear about what software has worked? In our group, 3 or 4 names of different software were thrown out, and there were examples like this that would be great to have somebody's guidance in the implementation.
So I take that as a sort of good suggestion for CRLT. That I think the idea of a syllabus bank is a really good one, and that's something that we can start working on, as well as putting together more robust resources on flipped classrooms. Whether it's technology, there were questions that came up about lecture capture and different ways of recording lectures, and I know we have a web page on that. I will not vouch that it's completely up to date, but I think that for us to pull together some of those resources and send them out to this group and make them available more widely on campus is some piece of follow-up that we can do from this seminar, and I think we'd be glad to do that. Anybody? Yeah.
I would also say if you're doing it the first time, just get in touch with CRLT. They really helped us when we got nervous. We would, we had Chad and Rachel on speed dial and and just for a little reality check. And then we asked for, we had Rachel come in and do focus groups at the end of the term to, with both of us out of the classroom, and she asked a few questions, and then we debriefed what could we do better next time, what should we leave out, what should we be a little bit, what could we tweak. So really do use their expertise. They're very willing to come and help you, and it's really helped us make some improvements. And I just see it as an iterative process. We've made lots of mistakes, we'll make some more, but having some support along with not being afraid to try has really helped.
The one piece of technology that I stumbled on that really proved instrumental, at least in the way I operate in the classroom, is tablets. I'm a PC user, and in the old days with the flip screen around and you can write on the tablet. Now there's a Microsoft Surface, which I use in the classroom. What I like about that is if the students have watched a lecture that maybe we gave a couple years ago and it was in the PowerPoint format, I bring those slides in. Now I can write on top of it. If it happens to be, let me go back to that landfill example, and I want to actually click over to video, I can just touch it with my finger, touch it with a pen, and now we're in YouTube. And we're just, I'm fast forward at that point. Remember, what that is? That's not just soil. That's a special substance, et cetera, what have you. Talk about liners and landfills or what have you. And they can see it. So you can jump multimedia. Then, later in that same class, we'll be working on a problem. Maybe it's related to material scarcity or something like that, and production rates for copper, who knows. How long is it going to take to run out of copper if you're, using it at a certain rate, and they make certain assumptions about the consumption. I will talk to the class about how to do the problem, but I won't go back to the board and just write it out, every unit, every number, because that's going to take time that we're actually using to flip the classroom. So now I'll switch over to OneNote, where I've actually written out at least my solutions, and and a lot of these are sort of stepwise. So I could take them to a certain part of the solution that I came up with, explain why I did it this way, and you know what, I could tell the student that way is another way to do it. So I can just erase it and do it that student's way, or sometimes they find mistakes in mine. So being able to switch from the different modes has been really helpful. So that's just a plug for a tablet PC in my case.
I got funding through Elsney ITS. They had technology funds that you could apply for to adapting technology in your classroom, and allowed me to have a GSI to help me put something together. It's a big help, because that way you don't have to spend your summer when you want to do research and writing just doing all your class stuff. And a brief example of how that helped, one of the first classes I have is in the class of the West, is the sort of First West. And there's an original autobiography of Daniel Boone that he's written, and I searched that. It's on microform in the library. I went to the library. I printed out the autobiography, like all 30 pages in microform. Then I took it to my department and I photocopied it to myself as a PDF, and then I uploaded the PDF. And so when I was sitting to plan this out with the GSI I had hired through the ITS funding, I started explaining, hey, I got this great thing, this autobiography of Daniel Boone. And as I'm explaining to him the process, he went online and pulled up a copy through the National Archives. And he said, yeah, here it is. And I said, what? And then he's like, yeah, and here at the National Archives, it links to other related documents. And I was like, oh. So the short answer could be also get somebody who's in their 20s to help you.
Other questions? Yeah, why don't I come to you? Where are you? Okay.
Thank you for everything you have taught us. I have noticed probably reluctance from our fears to change the flipped classroom. And I know we're teachers, we're instructors, and everything we do is for our students. But how about in the personally, what have you gained from this experience? How about the pre-flipped classroom era to the now and the projection to the future? And I know we would be rock stars if we had these big egos. And I know you don't, but I want to hear some of your comments.
Well, I think the best thing is just going from seeing students with the feet up on the back of the chairs and, Facebook, to sitting there talking to each other, and that noise level going up in the classroom. I mean, it's a level of excitement about the topic. Also, I have to tell you, there's something really nice about seeing a group get up on the sort of a small stage where we are. And they get up there and they can't wait to show you what they've learned or what the team has put together. They're good at this, and we don't give them very much opportunity to sort of show their knowledge. So that feels really good. And then the other thing is there's a bit of cynicism about some of our students sometimes, but when they listen respectfully, when they offer good suggestions to each other, when I see them, one group offering a positive suggestion to another, I feel like, okay, that's all right with me. We're where we need to be.
Yeah, I think it boils down to where you get your energy from. You talk about pre-flipped and then post-flipped, right? And what's the difference? Before, going to class felt like work, and now it is work, but it doesn't feel as much like work. This environment can give you a lot of energy. I used to take pride in how good of a PowerPoint lecture I could give. That's one thing I could do, is give a really good PowerPoint lecture. It would take every time, even if I know the subject cold, I'd have to put 3 hours into it, because it'd been a year since I'd done it before. And every time, it's just who I am. I just rearrange it and just put it just right. But literally, it's moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. Is it really a good use of time? Or is, providing, that really good lecture I did 3 years ago to them on video, and now asking them to view it and ask questions and submit questions and now talk about their questions for the first 10 or 20 minutes and now actually apply that stuff in ways that are interesting to them, hopefully, at least as I try to put myself in those shoes. And then actually experiencing what I'd hoped they would experience, like that, just fires me up and it gets me excited to do it again. I've been lucky to get to start a new class in mechanical engineering in the fall, and I know there's 53 students. I can picture them now. And talk about doing research over the summer. I'd say for a month I just said, forget it. I'm doing this because this is actually what I want to be doing. I love my research. It's going great, and got a lot of students, and I'll be keeping up with them. But I'm taking a month, and this is what I'm doing. And it wasn't like that before. I would never have taken a month, to create experiences for a new kind of class like this.
I would totally agree. It's been a transformative experience to me, and I think the first time I did it, I became like evangelical about the difference, and it's because it was such a qualitative difference in both the classroom, even on your best days in your lecture when you are on fire. There's still the kids sleeping on the second row, and there's that just happens. Even when you're trying to be interactive, it's just a fundamentally different experience. The extent to which you can feel them with you, engaged in thinking through material and thinking about it's really a night and day difference. So much so that when I first did this, like I said, I was doing a new class and I wanted a way to do that. And I thought I'll keep my other survey class, which I have down. I can always do every lecture there. But it was so transformative that I said, okay, I've got to switch to the other class. I can't go back to this other way of teaching. And that's not only, so it's first in the classroom, but then the other real telling moment was that my office hours were full of people who had to figure out how to write these essays that I was asking them to write. And so it was almost much more like the small class experience, the seminar. And I had a sense of, before with the GSI or when you're just lecturing, you have very little sense of what they're doing with the content you give to them. In this sense, I had a real hands-on experience with how they're understanding the material that I'm putting out there, because we have to interact both in the classroom and then later on when they do reports. So it was definitely transformative.
The only other thing I would add is that when's the last time you heard your students clap for each other in the classroom? But they do that. So they really want to see each other do well too. And, with you up there talking away, they don't clap for you. But when they clap for each other, they show each other that support. I mean, that's what, makes me want to come back and try harder to do a little bit better every time.
Well, I think that's a very inspiring note to end on. So I'd like to thank our panel again for their words of wisdom.